everyone. Thanks for joining today. I have a very special guest today. Her name is Shelley F. Knight, and today we're going to be discussing the topic of grief. Now, a lot of people automatically think of death when they think of grief, but I work with a lot of people who come to the end of a relationship, and that is also a grieving process. Shelley has a lot of experience working in this area, and so she's here to share some of her stories today. But first, let me just introduce Shelley. She is a positive changes expert who can help you through her written and spoken words. She passionately shares her years of clinical, spiritual, and holistic experience in her books, podcasts, coaching program, newsletter, YouTube, and social media work. So she's the author of Positive Changes, a self-kick book, Good Grief, the A to Z approach of modern day grief healing, and the host of an award-winning mental health show, Positive Changes, a self-kick podcast. So, Shelley, welcome, and thank you so much for joining me today.
Hi, Emmy. Thank you so much for inviting me on.
Yes. So I love, first of all, the positive changes coaching and the fact that you wrote a book around that, because I focus a lot with my coaching program in looking forward and kind of thinking about who and where you want to be. I was drawn, however, to read your Good Grief book first, because I get asked a couple of questions around grief, and I like to speak with someone who has experience around it, because I don't have a whole lot of it when it comes to the death of losing somebody, more of like, ended relationships. So people ask me, how do you cope with the loss of a partner who maybe you've been with for the majority of your life, or at least a good chunk of years? And is that grieving process different from just the end of a relationship due to a breakup or a divorce or something? So what's your take on that? And then we can kind of dive into your experience with loss through death based on what your profession was for many years.
Yeah, it's really valid what you say, Emmy, because, when I wrote Good Grief, I remember like when it was published, when my friend goes, "Oh, well, I won't buy this book because, no one I know has died." And I was like, well, actually, that's not what grief is. But I think even the world thinks that grief is when someone dies. But as I describe in Good Grief, it's, to me, grief is when we lose anything with which we have an emotional connection. So if we look at the pandemic of the COVID, I suspect most of us are grieving. Some will be a loss of our health from COVID. Yes, we may have lost loved ones, but we lost finances, freedom, choices, so much was lost. And a lot of relationship breakdowns too. So many people, when they were stuck together for so long, went their own separate ways. So you can certainly grieve at the end of a relationship, but it's kind of not spoken about. People expect them to actually die, don't they? And then you can feel sorry for yourself. But no, you're absolutely right. We have a grief process where we lose anything with which we have an emotional, connection. And that's good and bad relationships. It's still part of who we are, part of our daily routine and things like that. The main difference is, for me, that if your partner dies, there is no comeback, there is no sense of hope, is there? Oh, trying to work things out, they've transitioned from the earthly plane and it's very final. And you probably need to deal with that very different. But that's not to say that when people, fall out of our love dies and they move on to someone new or whatever reason, that we don't grieve for that as well. It's still a loss at the end of the day.
Yeah. And so I hear you saying that they could be very similar, even though they're different processes. What do you think are the main elements of grief? And I like that you said, it's almost like you give yourself permission to be sad and grieve when you lose somebody to death. Because it's almost like society is like giving you a free pass, for a little while, but what happens if you do go through this like horrible breakup or divorce? It's like, you got to just like show up for work the next day and be like on, and where is that time and energy that you get to spend processing what changes are occurring in your life? So what would you say are like the main elements of grief so that people can even know that they're grieving? I think sometimes, especially what I see with my clients and in my breakup support group, is that people are very hard on themselves. And I know I was in the past too. It's like, I should just be able to get over this. I should just be able to move on. It's just a breakup. So how do we know if we're grieving?
There's so many different signs and symptoms. There's probably over 100, because you have to think, like, I don't think we give enough credit or awareness to just, if we should look at the physical aspects of loss. So we might lose our appetite or overeat. We might get headaches, sore throats, which I'm a bit of a spiritual woo-woo person, but I think it's because we're not communicating. I think, research tells us we do get heartache and broken hearts and things like that. We get skin changes, even how we go to the toilet changes from constipation, diarrhea. It affects us physically in so many ways. But then there's the emotional side, and it's very hard to recognize the emotion because often we're so used to being emotional as part of a partnership, if that makes sense. People say, oh, my other half. So, emotionally, we don't understand ourselves. Mentally, we might be angry, disappointed, questioning. And then there's like the spiritual side, like people sometimes when they lose things, especially if there's a death, want to search for meaning and find a purpose in it all. And then there's the social side, you'll have one friend going like, well, I never liked him anyway. And you'll have the others, that, might feel your pain, but it's just so multifaceted what we go through. And that's what I was saying about the pandemic. I think a lot of us were grieving for loss of normalcy, finances, relationships, everything, but we wouldn't recognize that headache, the insomnia, the anxiety, the skin changes, whatever, was actually a grief process happening within our body.
I love that you pointed that out, because sometimes we don't make that connection of something physical that's happening. It's like, oh, I never used to get stomach aches before, but now everything I eat is bothering me, or, any of the other examples that you gave. And so we can kind of get curious about any changes, even subtle, that we might notice in either our body or our energy or even our thoughts. And I think it's very frustrating for people at times, from what I hear, that they tell me and that I've experienced, is that you have all these things swirling around, maybe even just a different energy in your own body, and you can't identify like exactly what it is or why you feel that way. And so sometimes when people have a label for something, it's almost like, oh, okay, I'm grieving now. It almost like relieves us. It gives you like a relief of stress a little bit. Um, because it gives you permission to understand what's happening. How do you feel about that idea?
Yeah, and I see things, as you know from reading the book Good Grief, I see things from a clinical background, having been a nurse, chemotherapy nurse for many years, clinical hypnotherapy, but then going very spiritual. And I think sometimes, I'm saying sometimes, I mean always, Emmy, that if we don't stop and take a check-in on our life, our body or the universe will stop us. So we might not know we're grieving, but when you've got the sore throats, the colds, the aches and pains from the grief, inevitably we'll end up somewhere where we have to stop. So I think it's the body's way of saying, like, stop carrying on, just stop for a while. Maybe that's why we get the physical manifestations of grief, because then we can justify it, can't we, if we're unwell.
Yeah, and like you just were saying, sometimes that can even turn into a full-blown disease or some kind of like bigger illness than just headaches, right? I mean, it could potentially manifest as something much larger. And I like your phrasing that forces you to stop and be like, hey, wake up, deal with this. One thing that just caught my attention right off the bat in the beginning of the book, you presented this definition of life in a way that I had never heard it done before. And, the whole beginning of your book is really outlining like what actually is death, what is the dying process. And so that was interesting. And so in relation to your definition of life, I was like, whoa. And you said that, and I'm not quoting, it's kind of a rephrasing, but you said life is just a series of changes before death.
Yeah.
And it's like, wow, when you think about it like that, I think change is super challenging, depending on how grandiose that transition might be. That includes the loss, of course, of something or a person. But if you think about life just being a series of changes, and how are you able to adapt to those changes? Can you expand on like where did you get that idea? Is it yours? Did you find it somewhere? Tell me more about that life definition.
Yeah, so I've well, I'm heading towards half a century, so I've had quite a few changes in my life. But to me, like, we're not aware of changes. But to me, it's really obvious. Like, we go from day to night, from young to old, to birth to death. It's just changes after changes. Like, I've changed my job many times. My body's changed. I've done the whole, like, is it maiden mother crone stage kind of thing. But there's always changes happening, from the season to season. But people say, oh, I don't do change, I'm never going to change. But I had this real feisty thing within me that just, live your best life, go with the changes, go with the flow, because life's going to change anyway. You could stand there really feisty thinking, well, I'm not doing that, I'm not changing. But I just think we're far too intelligent to get in our own way. Just go through the changes. Like, I don't want to go off on one, but a lot of people know that follow me for many years, that what triggered my whole positive changes and grief expert was the sudden death of my father. And that happened New Year's Day when I was on shift as a nurse, and from that I've done all the sort of changes. But it was the biggest catalyst in my life. It wasn't the quickest, grief recovery by any means, it's been like 15, 16 years now, but I don't want to stay where I was then. My dad would want me to stay where I was then. We don't really do a justice to ourselves or those that have gone, whether that's, in death or relationship where someone's left us. We don't, no one benefits from staying where you are. And so I just think always make those changes. I'm really curious. I think there's a saying, isn't there? Curiosity killed the cat. So if it was a cat, I'd probably be dead, Emmy. But, the past is in the past. And I always have this, I say to my kids, oh, well, keep looking forward, don't look backwards, you're not going that way. And absolutely time for reflection, looking for the lessons, turning your mess into a message, absolutely. But ultimately, we're here to live our life. And so just keep moving forward. And so I just think, as I say, day, night, loss, recovery, there's always changes, whether we like it or not. I just don't think we're always aware of it.
Yeah, and I think that's a huge point, speaking to ended relationships, not maybe, due to death or just, breaking up, is that resistance to accept that my life is now changing, or, it's not going to proceed the same way as it was before with the same person or people in my life. And being able to reach a point of acceptance around that, I think will create a lot less friction for yourself trying to figure out, okay, what does this new landscape look like? And I think it's hard, people always just say, oh, just let it go, let that person go. But it's so hard if you are resisting what's happening.
Yeah,
Right.
we want
And
to hang
so,
on, don't we? We want to get those answers. We want them to know we're hurting, and you want to know what if and if only and how dare you and victimhood, all that. And it's okay to dip in that, absolutely. But I just wouldn't recommend staying there. Maybe like an overnight trip there, maybe a week. But beyond that, it just saddens me. But then I've worked at the end of life, do you know what I mean? So I know just how precious life is. We say life's too short, But I think having been a chemotherapy nurse, working with those dying, I've seen the lessons come to life, those life lessons come to life, you know, and we could sit there being angry about, you know, somebody who bullied us at school, and that was 30 years ago, you know, or we could be upset about the ex that cheated on us. But I always have this thing. I'm in my office now and there's a sign that says the best is yet to come. And I always believe that. I always think I haven't come this far to only come this far. And, you know, I just encourage people to, yeah, absolutely, the messages, the lessons, you know, but just get curious and like find something to move forward for. And I would recommend that thing you move forward for is yourself, you know.
Yeah.
To me, I'm quite feisty about self-love and the relationship with self. And so, yeah, when I say find something to believe in, I would please ask you to start with yourself.
I couldn't agree more. A lot of the work that we do in my coaching program, as I'm sure yours, is really focusing on that who and where you want to be moving forward, versus the dwelling in what's getting stuck in what's not working for you right now, or the loss of something. But one thing that I had started reading some of your accounts of that I think is really important to highlight about your book is that you talk about the things that you learned from spending time with people in their last moments, but you also got to witness their family and how they react to it. What would you say, and you did talk about some of these in your book, what would you say are some of the key things that people who are in their end stages and they know that they're dying, they're heading towards death, what are the things that they either express or found to be the most important or meaningful, or maybe even wish they had done? What are some of those biggest things?
I think one of the biggest things for me is that I was never asked for them to bring in that designer outfit, that sort of designer car or things like that. It's not, it's always at the end of the life, the realization, the little things were the big things all along. So it'd be me, you know, reaching out to the estranged family members, saying the sorries, the I loves you, or, you know, speaking their truth. And that reminds me really that I might seem quite feisty to some people, and that I don't, you know, I'm very, what was it, like straight talking about death and grief and broken relationships. But as I said earlier, having worked at the end of life, time really is short. And so he used to say things like, you know, be happier. And I was like, well, that's a bit rhetorical, isn't it? But it's true, like we don't always celebrate our small wins, and we don't want to sort of like blow our own trumpet, you know, and celebrate things that we achieve in case someone else is having a hard time or something like that. But the life lessons were like, be happier, connect to something bigger than yourself, like a sense of community in the universe, fundraising, you know, like-minded people. Do more of what you love. And we don't, do we? We always think, oh, I'll save for that, and I'm working Monday to Friday, and I'll only be happy on the weekend, and things like that. And it's true, you know, if you think you're working a 5-day week ready for a 2-day weekend, you're kind of saying, I'll have 5 years horribleness and 2 years will be okay, isn't it? You just, you know, yeah, so do more of what you love, live your life. Because I worked a lot with generations older than me, when people had to sort of marry the girl they got pregnant or inherit their family's business, and they were living a life that was given to them, given a life that was expected of them. So always live your life, you know, travel to that place, study for that new job, you know, wear those bright colors, whatever, live your life. But the one I used to really love, and it's still poignant, I think most nurses can remember a patient that sort of stuck with them. The most beautiful man who had esophageal cancer, and he'd never spoken his truth in his life. He'd always like married that girl, done that job, you know, behaved, shall we say. He'd always behaved, and he'd never spoken his truth, and we was about to do radiotherapy and chemotherapy, so he was going to lose his voice. And working with him was life-changing for me. And probably, I'm sure my husband would say, like, yeah, it's true, love, you don't really like shut up since, if I'm honest. But it's true that we need to speak. Like at the end of life, when I'm saying they don't want designer outfits, the designer cars, they just want to say, you hurt me, I love you. They want to speak, get those words out they didn't say in their life due to fear of judgment, courage, bad timing, whatever. So I would always encourage people to speak their truth. And, you know, if we look at relationships rather than death, like relationships dying, I'm a huge advocate of still speaking your truth. I'm not saying that like a drunk text to your ex is a good thing, but I do think like, you know, writing a letter, burning it under a full moon, burning a letter, ripping it up, just saying it aloud, like to a teddy bear or to something, just get those words out. Because I worked a lot with breast cancer women, and they would say things when I was doing the chemotherapy, like, you know, it's like therapy. They've literally got these tubes going in them, giving them chemotherapy. They can't go anywhere. And they would just sort of start to talk for the first time ever, first time in years. And when they was talking about people that had wronged them and things like that, they'd be like, I'm so glad I got that off my chest. Wow. And I really do believe in dis-ease. And it's why I wrote Good Grief, because I went in very clinical, but I've come out very spiritual. And I've just seen, like, you know, man with esophageal cancer, the lady with breast cancer, like when we don't speak our truth, when we don't speak out, move forward, I just think it sort of festers inside of us and will pop up somewhere. Again, goes back to that thing, like, you know, we don't let go of the grief in our life, and at some point it's going to manifest and come out, and then you'll be stopped and have to sit with it.
Wow. Yeah, that's a really powerful example that I've never really thought about that phrase, and we hear it all the time. Like, you need to get it off your chest. And then so interesting that it manifested in the form of breast cancer, obviously in the chest, or a man who wasn't speaking his feelings in the throat. And as a spiritual person, I know you probably are into like the chakras, and, you know, if that throat chakra is blocked, you know, what happens if the energy can't flow all the way through. Really interesting. Do you have any like main tips for people who are grieving in any regard, whether it's through the loss of a loved one through death, or the end of a relationship, or even any life transition, really? Like, what's the best way to kind of go about helping yourself grieve?
So in Good Grief, it's like the A to Z of grieving tools. So I would recommend you try them. But before you even start about the healing, I would encourage you to sit in the rawness of it all. You know, as much as I'm into healing and moving forward, I don't think it's healthy or right to just hands your way through grief and life generally. I think things happen for a reason. And I can say that I've been through a lot of loss. And at the time I was just angry and questioning, but I have been through a lot. And so I'd encourage you to look for the reason, not why is it happening to you, more of a why is it happening for me? And I'd just ask you to sit for 10 minutes a day in the silence of it all and just see what comes up. What's the lesson? What's the message? When did you feel this energy in the past situation? What did you do in the past to move forward? Because, you know, no matter how you feel right now, you've got a 100% success rate in life. You know, you're still here. How did you get here? What are the tools? What are your strategies? What do you want? What do you not want? You know, and so absolutely heal, but it's just sitting in it. It's almost, I don't want to say it's a blessing, because everyone's gonna be like, oh my God, she's mad, that woman. But it's not a blessing, but it is a lesson, a teaching, maybe is a better word, that when we go through a loss, whether it's death, loss of a job, loss of confidence, you know, dreams, whatever it is, there'll be a lesson in there. I'm a great fan of Viktor Frankl. He was a psychotherapist who survived the Holocaust, and he showed us through research and his own observations that, you know, we don't really suffer in life just for suffering's sake. We suffer only when there's no meaning to it. You know, we only suffer when there's no meaning to the loss in our life. If we start to find meaning in life, it gets easier. You know, if you think, oh, he left me, it's awful, or, you know, I'm ugly, fat, no one's ever going to love me. What if? It doesn't work. If we sit with it and think, like, who was I before that person? You know, that whole other half thing, I hate that. He was my other half. No, you're whole. You were whole before you met them, you'll be whole again. Sit with the rawness and just rediscover who you are. And I think you find you're blooming beautiful.
And you think what? Can you repeat that?
You'll just find that you're blooming beautiful. We forget how beautiful we are. We always want other people's reassurance, like, you look nice, you look good, you know, I love you. But you need to love yourself. So sit in the rawness, look for the lessons and the messages, and just know that, you know, you are awesome. You
Oh,
are.
yeah, all of that is amazing, amazing advice. I love that little reframe around why is this happening to me? So I think that's what causes people to get stuck in that space and just dwell there and reframe it. How is this happening for me? I think is a wonderful way to reframe the self-assessment and the reflection that goes along with all of that. So,
Yeah.
Shelley, oh yeah, go ahead.
No, I just think it's very much victimhood, isn't it? When we're saying, oh, why is it happening to me? We forget that other people are having relationship breakdowns, other people are, you know, feeling broken, and that, you know, if you say what's happening for me, I don't think you can say it in such a negative way. Do you know what I mean? There's an upliftment to it. And I think it's a question, isn't it? Like, why is it happening? What's happening for me? It's like an opportunity. So
Yeah, it allows you to get curious about it, right?
yeah, my
I
favorite
wonder
word.
why is this happening? Yeah, no,
Yeah.
I do like that. Can you tell us where people can get your book if they would like to have a read?
Yeah, so if you head over to the website, so it's www.shelleyfknight.com, and you can just go under books and it'll be there, and you can read more about me, but I think you covered it all in the bio.
Nice, nice. And I think it's also available on Amazon, right? Because I know I downloaded it on Kindle, so it's there as well, right?
Yeah, it's is it Barnes and Noble? It's on John Hunt Publishing, Amazon. I think
Okay.
it's pretty much everywhere.
Awesome, awesome. Well, thank you so much for all of your insights today. And I really appreciate you sharing all of your experience through personal and also in your profession with us today so that we can better understand grief.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for having me on. Thank you.
All right. I'll talk to you soon.